Let's start. So today we're going to talk about cholesterol and cholesterol myth, because this is something that I like talking about because there is so much misinformation, and I will take you through the misinformation step by step. And why we talk about cholesterol is because of the association of high cholesterol levels in the blood with cardiovascular diseases and atherosclerosis, also known as hardening of the arteries. Yeah. And how it came about in the 70s, last century, when Ansel Keys was on a mission to convince the world that high saturated fat diet is directly linked to heart disease. And he was successful in that because he managed to persuade the American government in that. And in 1977, there was a congressional hearing of various experts on dietary guidelines, and they created this government guidelines for Americans, and then it was adopted in the UK as well. And that guideline was challenged by the scientists, quite a few scientists at the time, and they were saying that it's just simply not based on the scientific evidence. And they were quite right, because Keys just cherry-picked the facts and presented it to the government. And because there was no other good theory at the time about the origin of heart disease, they just took that theory and rolled along with that. Isn't that interesting how down the track you look back in time, and it just stuns you how little facts were presented, and it was adopted by the whole country, and the whole nation went along with those guidelines. So the British Medical Journal published an article, and the article was called "Evidence from Randomized Controlled Trials Did Not Support the Introduction of Dietary Fat Guidelines in 1977 and 1983. And that was a systematic review and meta-analysis, which is like this huge undertaking in the scientific world. And I just put a quote with the conclusion that they came to after reviewing tons of scientific articles on fat guidelines, dietary fat guidelines. And the conclusion was that dietary recommendations were introduced for 220 million US citizens and 56 million UK citizens by 1983 in the absence of supporting evidence from RCTs. And RCT stands for Randomized Controlled Trial. And this is a gold standard in medical research. So there was none available, and still the guidelines were adopted. So this is the history, why we're talking about cholesterol and why it is measured nowadays. So I think probably every one of you have had a blood test where cholesterol was measured, right? And yeah, so that's the history of it. No evidence whatsoever. And now we're doing it. So that brings me to the question, what is cholesterol? So cholesterol is a sterol, which is steroid and alcohol, and a lipid found in the cell membranes of all body tissues and transported in the blood plasma of all animals, and we are considered to be animals. So just think about it for a second, right? Now stop sharing. So it is found in all the body tissues, in all cell membranes, right? So can it be bad? So we're reducing something that basically we are composed of. So we have proteins, and proteins is like building blocks in the body, right? And lipids, fats, they are like binding stuff. They provide flexibility of those building blocks, right? So just by logic, what do you reckon? Let's go back to that. I don't know how to do the slide so that I don't have that column on the left side, but it's just a bit too difficult for me right now. Maybe a slideshow. Hold on a second. From the current slide. Wow, that worked. I hope it's better. Yeah. So cholesterol is a steroid, an alcohol, or a lipid. It does not circulate freely in the blood. Yeah, it does not circulate freely in the blood because it should be carried by a lipoprotein. And this is what you see on your blood test results. So it's HDL, it's high density lipoprotein. LDL, low density lipoprotein. There is also VLDL, very low density lipoprotein. IDL, intermediate density lipoprotein. And some of them are not measured, some of them are measured. And there is also lipoprotein A, LPA, which is not measured, but you see that I put it in red. And this is something that is most linked to the atherosclerotic deposits in the arteries. So interestingly enough, something that is the most, has the most connection to the topic is not measured in the blood test. Where is cholesterol found? So cholesterol found is in all these cell membranes, right? And also in erythrocytes. There are a lot of cholesterol in erythrocytes, which is red blood cells. And brain, 20% of all cholesterol in the body is found in the brain. How cool is that? Well, brain is mostly fat, right? And cholesterol is there. And again, just think about what cholesterol lowering medication may do to the brain if brain has cholesterol. And obviously, brain needs cholesterol. So cholesterol has many functions in the body. First is it's needed for hormone production. It's needed for vitamin D production. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and it is also considered to be a semi-hormone. So the first 2 points are kind of connected. Vitamin D is an anti-inflammatory vitamin, and some hormones, they also reduce inflammation. So cholesterol is, by definition, is an anti-inflammatory agent, which is quite cool. So it builds cell membranes, and it is useful in bile acid production, right? So the bile acids, we need them to emulsify fats, to digest fats from food. And so we kind of looked at what cholesterol is and what it does in the body. And it is quite a useful substance, right? Again, just going back with the logical thinking and asking yourself a question. If it is that helpful, if 20% of the total cholesterol in the body is in the brain, how useful can cholesterol lowering medication be, right? Just something to ponder about. And then we look at atherosclerotic plaques. So something that medical industry thinks cholesterol plays a huge role in, in the formation of those plaques and narrowing the arteries, right? And leading to the heart disease. So this is, if you dig deeper than WebMD or some superficial websites online, you can find that those plaques consist of these things. Yeah. So if you go to WebMD, you'll find, oh, this is something that consists of cholesterol, which is total rubbish. So this is what it consists of: small muscle cells, macrophages, lymphocytes, which is white blood cells, collagen, elastin, calcium, lipid, lipoprotein, fibrinogen, which is a protein produced in the liver. Right, so interesting. Some proteins, calcium, collagen, which is a protein too. And lipid and lipoproteins is just a little bit of them. Yeah. Just again, going back to the idea that cholesterol plaques are all cholesterol, which is absolutely untrue. And there was this interesting article called Update on Fibrinogen as a cardiovascular risk factor. I'm going to read the whole quote, but basically if you go back, and I again highlighted fibrinogen, put it in red, and this is something that has been researched in the 90s a lot and later on, and found to be the main cause of atherosclerosis. Yeah. And there was a call in the medical research community to look into something like fibrinogen lowering substances to help people to prevent atherosclerosis. So I thought I'll just give you a few facts, right? What cholesterol is, what an atherosclerotic plaque is, and how can we put it all together? How can we marry all those and see if the theory about cholesterol being the main culprit in the heart disease is true? I hope it makes sense so far. So there is one fact that I want to bring your attention to, and that's cholesterol does not flow freely in the blood. It is transported by lipoproteins, as I mentioned previously. Just keep that in mind, okay? And here are a couple of facts that I thought I'll throw at you as well. So the first one is about chimpanzees, who are vegetarians mostly, and they have much higher levels of LDL in the blood. And those creatures do not experience atherosclerotic plaques. How interesting is that? And they are the closest to us, right, genetically. And another fact is that atherosclerotic plaques, thrombi, because they're basically like thrombus, yeah? Thrombi is the plural of thrombus. They're fibrous in their structure with a little cholesterol present. And that cholesterol is from the cell membranes, not LDL, because I think the next one is going to be LDL cannot cross endothelium. And endothelium is the layer of the artery. Yeah, the inner layer. So it's also called intima sometimes. So intima is basically endothelium. And there is the medium layer and the outer layer, right? So, and plaques are only formed in the arteries, not veins. And interestingly enough, LDL, there is more LDL in veins than arteries, but there is no plaques there. So if LDL cannot cross endothelium, how can a plaque be formed? So that's a question as well, right? Are you with me? I hope you're with me. So another question, so we looked at what they're composed of, what they consist of, the plaques, and again, cholesterol plaques, that's a misnomer. I just put it because a lot of people use this name, but it's atherosclerotic plaques. There is very little cholesterol in there. So why are they formed? The most probable theory is it's a thrombus etiology, and etiology means like how it happens, right? So when endothelial layer is injured, the body tries to repair it. Yeah, so there's an injury to the artery, to the inner layer, to the endothelium, and the body throws all the reserves to ensure that it's all patched up. So we have a clot, basically. The next question is, how does, so it's endothelium, not epithelium, there is a typo there. How does it get damaged? How's that layer of the artery get damaged? So there are two factors and they're overlapping. The first is stress, and it's either emotional, psychological stress or environmental. And by environmental, foods, stresses that stress the system, anything outside, any toxins. And inflammation, well, basically any stress leads to inflammation. So inflammation can also be of viral bacterial origin, and any chronic diseases, especially kidney or lung conditions, they're closely linked to heart disease, diabetes, and any autoimmune conditions. I do not like the labels, but I'll just put them because that's what's in circulation in the medical language at the moment. So I just put them there. And what I want to say is that inflammation is really a healing response. And that's how naturopathically we see that. And it should be supported rather than suppressed. So whenever there is any, I want to say disease, any health condition, we need to support the body to go through that rather than to suppress the symptoms. Again, there are two interesting quotes. And when I was researching this subject, there is so much, there is endless articles about endothelial damage and its link to clotting, to clots in the arteries, which we call, the cholesterol plaques, which are not cholesterol plaques. So the first one is going back to the fact that viruses and bacteria, they can do some damage. That's the first quote about that. And the second quote is about periodontal disease or any sort of root canals, any sort of dental disease. So it's been out there for 20, 30 years, I think, the proven link between periodontal or dental diseases and heart attacks. So they actually found periodontal bacteria in atherosclerotic plaques, right? So look after your dental health, and that will be the prevention of atherosclerosis. Another type of lipid that you may notice on your blood test results alongside your cholesterol, HDL, LDL, is triglycerides. And this is something that I point my clients' attention to, because for me, this is the most indicative of any sort of inflammatory condition in the body. So triglycerides, they're types of fat found in the blood, and the body converts any calories that it doesn't need into triglycerides. Yeah. And this is the thing that I want you to read with me. Genetic evidence demonstrates that high concentration of triglyceride-rich lipoproteins are causally associated with low-grade inflammation. So when we have high count of triglycerides in the blood, that is indicative of inflammation, right? And if you have your blood test results with you, you can have a look and see if it's under 1.5 millimoles per liter. So that would be an ideal range. Lower than 1 is even better, but I don't want to see it any higher than 1.5. We are coming towards this time when we need to discuss cholesterol medication, okay? Because I'm kind of running out of time. It's very hard to fit everything in half an hour so that we can talk about your questions later. So there are tons of medications, there are tons of names for that. They're all statins. And these are the side effects. So the directory that I like to use and I like to direct my clients to is called RX List, rxlist.com. You can find pretty much any medication there, and there is a part for practitioners and part for clients, for regular people. So it's not as heavy with lingo, with some medical jargon, but yeah, I'm pretty sure you can read it as well. And there are side effects for all the medication. So if you look at this list for statins, it's interesting that heart attack and cardiomyopathy, so heart conditions, are on the list of side effects of the medication that was, is still used to combat heart conditions. It's very, very ironic. And liver damage. And we know that liver is very important in, producing certain substances for blood clotting as well. So this is something that I also talk about. Statins, they had a very bad rep from the off. There were multiple lawsuits against the manufacturers, especially Pfizer from memory. And the lawsuits were settled outside the court with big payouts. And no one knows what actually, they paid, but it was millions and millions of dollars. And now we have a huge class action, and what they're suing against is that statins cause heart disease. Again, something that they're supposed to help with, right? So when I send you the link to the recording, you can read all the quotes if you want and look up the articles if you like. And you feel free to ask me for more information if you need. But I just wanted to finish the presentation on the note of how you can support your cardiovascular system. Instead of focusing on what's wrong, how we can focus and do something that will promote health. So first things first is keeping hydrated is so important for all the systems in the body. But how it relates to the heart disease is that because you thin the blood just simply by drinking enough, right? When you have thick blood, it clots better. So keeping hydrated, move a lot. The deep vein thrombosis is most common for people who fly a lot, long distance, so not moving enough. Movement is life, so moving is very important to prevent cardiovascular disease and clotting. Mental relaxation, so that reduces psychological stress. We talked about stress as something that may affect cardiovascular disease progression. So those things are very important. Avoiding use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So that's your Panadol and Nurofen, right? And the reason for that is that they simply damage endothelium layer. So the inner layer in the artery, they cause damage to that. And that's how they indirectly or directly, if we talk about heart disease as the disease of clotting, because the body sends platelets and cholesterol to fix the damage in the endothelium. So that's how it directly can cause that. And using niacin, that's your B3 vitamin, coenzyme Q10, especially in its active form, ubiquinol, magnesium, and vitamin C rich foods or supplements if it's hard to find foods rich in those substances for you, like seasonally, for example. So this is super important for heart health, right? And I always like to focus on foods. I think food is your medicine, should be your first medicine. And including these foods in your diet is super important. And those foods are turmeric. I'm personally not a big fan of turmeric. I don't like the taste, but you know, if you like it, use it in your Indian kind of style recipes. It's amazing. Ginger, garlic. So they all help to thin the blood and prevent clotting. Cayenne pepper, cinnamon prevents clotting, and fish oils. So your cod liver oil, old-fashioned cod liver oil, never fails.